Well, let's go ahead and get started and go through some of the agenda anyway. If we have to push pause for Eric later on, we'll do that. But I'll call the meeting to order at 8:04. And Jeanette, can you do the roll call?
Yes, sir. We have present Mr. Matt Mathewson,
Yes.
Kirsten Wainsvik,
Here.
and Claire Zucker.
Yes, here.
All right,
Very
we have a
good.
quorum.
Thank you. And the virtual meeting reminders, please remember to mute your microphones as a general rule during the meeting. If you want to add into the discussion, please demonstrate that by using the raise your hand feature in the Teams app. And when you're asked to speak, unmute the mics. Then when you're finished, lower your hand and remute. The audience, please either ask to be recognized or wait to be called on before participating. And just an advisory that the meeting is being recorded for open meeting law purposes. And please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Takes on a little special meeting on Election Day, right?
Hey, Matt, this is Jackson. One more time, just checking. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and I can hear you too, so I'm on the computer only now. Thank you. I'm out at the conveyance offices on Eric Wiedewald's old computer, and like when presidential candidates change, or presidents change, they sabotage the office. I think they did that to me personally.
That sounds like something they do.
I finally made it.
Hey, Eric, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, next we'll have the call to the audience. Any input from audience members? If not, I'll invite someone to give us a safety share today. Anyone?
Well,
including Jackson, I guess. Oh, go ahead, Claire.
I'll say that emotions can be high on election day, but also the week after. So this is a tricky election, and I just want everybody to be safe and take care of yourselves. Just be aware of your surroundings.
Very good. I went to the basketball game last night with my daughter, and she works at a church in town, and she commented on a flyer they had produced for their congregation. She said it said, pray, vote, and pray again. So that covers that week following. Okay, approval of the minutes. Any corrections or additions to the minutes noticed? Jeanette, I have one. And I emphasize one, page 3, down 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th bullet, where Ellen's speaking, the second line, where it says Royal Bank of Canada attend on the RWRAC subcommittee. I think that should be one of the subcommittee meetings instead of on. And usually I would have given that to you in advance, but I just caught it last night.
Well, thank you so much for catching that. I am clicking away to pull it up for you. Page 3, 5th bullet. Gotcha.
Second line.
Ms. Moulton suggested that the county financial advisor attend one of, yes, you are right. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Well, thank you for, again, a extraordinarily well-written and comprehensive set of minutes. It's, I'm sure, a great guide for the finance staff in helping us work through this process of creating the white paper.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure. Any other comments about the minutes? I guess I have one question too, Jeanette. On the 4th page, towards the bottom, right before subparagraph 2, there's a action item. Members will forward any comments or revision suggestions to Ms. Lee, who will then forward the comments request to FRMD.
Yes.
I don't remember actually having that said during the meeting. I could be mistaken, but when I did go through these, I noticed that, and it kind of jumped out at me. Is there a chance that was kind of just a reminder or something that you added in, or was that actually discussed in the?
It was part of the comments, that anybody who had any suggestions, forward them to me and I'd forward them to Ellen.
Okay, let me ask, did you receive anything?
Not a bit.
Okay. I didn't remember that, and so I didn't submit anything. I guess I'd like to ask Ellen if independent comments from individual members would be helpful, or do you want to limit the input to what happens during meetings? And I guess if subcommittee members have thoughts on that subject as well, or Jackson.
Well, my preference would be that it happened during the meeting so that we can get a consensus of what people want to see. I don't want to get something from person A who wants to go down a particular rabbit hole when the rest of the group does not. Or, if person B wants to go down a rabbit hole and a number of you also want to go down that rabbit hole, I would prefer to have a consensus as opposed to, and rabbit hole was not meant to be pejorative, just an expression down this lane versus that lane. I would prefer to have it done as a cohesive group so that I can understand what we're actually asking me and my staff to do.
Are we okay with that, subcommittee?
Yeah, I think doing it during the meeting is probably
Okay.
best.
Very good. All right. Hearing no other comments or corrections to the minutes, is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank
I'll
you,
second.
Kirsten. And
I'll
Claire,
second.
second. Thank you. All in favor of approval, say aye or raise your hand.
I
Thank you. They're all yours, Jeanette.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, moving into the discussion and action items. Returning to the white paper, the overview of our key financial metrics. Ellen, I don't know if you have a preference as to how to approach that, but if not, my suggestion would be that we kind of dive into Eric's questions, since we have at least that bit of outline and interest in specific topics.
That would be fine.
Okay.
can I make
What-
one just jumped in
Absolutely.
suggestion? So it is an 89-page document, which is fantastic. that said, we will be processing information, and I've read through it. Maybe many folks have. It seems like Eric has, but discussion is one thing, but I think it's important for Ellen that at the end of the discussion, we come to some kind of a consensus of, and therefore do this, or therefore don't do that, because otherwise we may just discuss and not come to an action item. So that would be my request, is that at the end of it, we make the action items to Ellen very clear.
Thank you for that. I appreciate direction.
Yes. That's absolutely great encouragement, and that'll be my goal. Okay, back to discussing. Thanks to Eric for submitting in response to Jeanette's call for agenda items, submitting some specific comments and questions, and we'll walk through those and at least see if we can improve our understanding of the pillars by doing that. Do you have the written questions, Ellen, or do you need me to?
I have them in front of me, but if you want me to share them on the screen, I can certainly do that.
Please do. I was going to dig for them otherwise. That'd be great.
Hopefully you guys can see that. Let's see if I can make it bigger. So. Is that legible to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Okay, if you're comfortable carrying on, I'll let you take the lead.
Okay, so the first question, and just so everyone knows, we have a number of finance staff on the call today. Isai, Val, and Roy all support wastewater from an operational perspective, day-to-day accounting. We also have Michelle Malinsky, who is our division manager over financial management and financial management, which means she handles cash and debt. And I will be relying on Michelle when I stray from the beaten path, just so we're all clear. All of these people support wastewater in their in the business from a financial accounting perspective. So the first question is, for the 4 pillars, are they really effective for the wastewater business model? And I would say yes, they are. The 4 pillars, as are outlined in the white paper, the first one is maintain at least $50 million in unrestricted cash. Having a healthy cash balance in any business is appropriate. It lends to the financial stability when you're reviewing the financial statements. It also allows creditors to take a look at your creditworthiness as an ongoing business. Maintaining the debt service ratio of at least 1.3. The debt service ratio provides rating agencies with the ability to, again, judge the creditworthiness and the business structure of the business that is trying to borrow debt. The county engages Standards & Poor's and Fitch to evaluate the financial stability and establish the creditworthiness of the system annually prior to any additional public sales of debt to investors. Included in the white paper documentation is an analysis benchmarking our wastewater system to other systems that also seek public financing. The when we used voter authorized debt, the coverage ratio that was in place at that point was 1.2. We have since increased that based on discussions with both the rating agencies and with RBC to ensure that the rating agencies and the public that buys the wastewater debt are assured of our creditworthiness and our ability to repay that debt. In the last meeting in one of the last meetings that we had on rating calls, Standards & Poor commented on our 1.3 ratio, and therefore that is one of the reasons why we want to continue to have that as one of the pillars. The other pillar is to minimize interest costs to ratepayers and comply with the Board of Supervisors pay-as-you-go model by limiting the terms of the new debt issues. Basically what that means is the Board of Supervisors has put forth a policy that tells us all that they want us on a more pay-as-you-go footing for long-term debt, as opposed to selling debt for what other utilities do 20, 25, 30 years. The county has historically not sold debt for that long. We believe that if we have cash in hand, we should be paying for the infrastructure now in a relatively shorter time period, less than 20 years. I believe we had one issue that went out to 20 years during the height of RUMP. But we are at the 15-year or less average debt sale right now. We believe that that is prudent because that limits our exposure on how much interest we are going to pay on that outstanding debt. It also has an impact on the county is subject to the Arizona Constitution's expenditure limitation, which means we can only use so many dollars on ongoing operations of the county. There is a cap that is set. Any debt that we do sell helps us stay below that constitutional limit. And it is looked at as the county as a whole, not just wastewater. So one of the things that we always have to consider when dealing with wastewater finances is how it fits into the county as a whole, because wastewater is just a part of the county, and it is the county's overall processes that also have to be taken into consideration when dealing with anything related to wastewater. The last pillar was utilize excess cash to repay debt. Wastewater generates a significant amount of revenue. And in order to keep our interest rates low, to keep our debt relatively stable, we have instituted a practice whereby any excess cash, usually in the realm of $20 million a year, is used to buy down debt when we issue new debt. That keeps the length of the debt shorter. It limits the amount of interest that we're having to pay, thereby saving costs to the ratepayers. And it keeps our financial portfolio and our financial statements in line with what the rating agencies have suggested and what our financial advisor has advised us to do. So that's the 4 pillars. I believe that they are effective in this wastewater model. Do we have any questions about those pillars before I get into some of the other individual questions that are on Eric's list?
And my sense would be that those three sub-questions are probably pertinent to the direction of his question, and I sense he's trying to make a distinction between the enterprise fund and the general fund as far as application of pillars go.
Well, wastewater does have its own revenue stream, fees for service. I'm not sure what standard they're being held to other than the county policy of limiting the length of debt and implementing the ongoing pay-as-you-go process. Wastewater having its own revenue stream facilitates a cleaner look at wastewater. When we look at wastewater, we just look at wastewater for revenues and expenditures. But when we look at the overall expenditures within wastewater, we have to take into consideration how it impacts the overall county. As I alluded to earlier, we have the expenditure limitation to take into consideration, as well as any board policies that the board has passed that do apply to wastewater. Wastewater is part of the county and has not been exempted from those policies. His question about large projects, we acknowledge that large projects have a longer payback, which is why we have not moved wastewater to the 5 to 7 year pay-as-you-go plan. We have acknowledged that, and we have wastewater in between the 10 and 15 year payback on debt. And anytime we have to issue debt for larger dollar amounts, as the CIP 5-year plan indicates, in a couple of years, we're looking at $70 or $80 million of debt because of the Sahuarita plant. We would take those into consideration and have that debt sold at probably closer to the 15-year mark. And why should the county be making early payments to reduce the level of indebtedness? My answer to that from a financial perspective is yes. We have significant cash reserves. It makes sense to pay down the debt so that we are not burdening future ratepayers with interest costs that could be avoidable. We all know that interest rates have gone up dramatically in the last number of years. Fortunately, our financial portfolio, our financial statements have allowed us to not have our interest rates raised considerably, although they have gone up from a little higher than 1% to, and Michelle, I'm sorry, I don't have this off the top of my head. What was the last interest rate that we sold the most recent debt for?
We're right under 3%.
3%. So almost doubling the interest rate, which is not insignificant, even if it is going from slightly above 1 to slightly below 3. When you're borrowing $50 million, it's not chump change.
Eric, I see a hand for a question.
Yeah, it's not a question. I thought I'd speak to my comment and to the points that I was bringing up. It is kind of my background. I look at this. I want to do no harm, kind of like the Hippocratic Oath, and I want to be able to keep it in a form that allows us to move forward with the best possible outcomes. And I've kind of always look at these ideas and these thoughts with that in mind. When it comes to the 4 pillars, my biggest question again, and Ellen, I really appreciate you going through in the detail you have. But I look at the 4 pillars and I look at them being much more responsive to the general operational fund for the county, which is produced by property tax, whereas we in the department have a service fee. And so we have a built-in funding mechanism that's based on a service fee that we set a rate for. So in looking at that and looking at our debt ratio and things like that, I appreciate the fact that we have a real high debt ratio right now. I mean, 1.35, 1.37 is laudable, but is it really necessary? And I'm looking at, from my perspective, that if we turned around and said, hey, look at the floor for that debt ratio, we can make that at 1.25. We would like to maintain 1.3. We're never going to go below 1.25. We'd like to keep it at 1.3 and then not try to push it so high above that. The debt ratio basically, and this is a very simplistic look at it, at least from my perspective, is just the amount of revenue against the expenses gives you your debt ratio. It's a little more complicated than that, I agree, but that's the basics. And so what drives this ratio is what do we charge the customers, our rates. And I look at the rates and they're very reasonable from my perspective. When it comes to the reserves do nothing in respect to setting the debt ratio. They are strictly money set aside over here. And I'm wondering, in reading this report that was set out, and I'll tell you, I'm not an economist, but there is an awful lot of stuff in there. And when I went through it, one of the things that popped out was the fact that somewhere along the line, they figure we have 510 days worth of funding money available to us in our program. And I thought, well, that's weird. When I look at the reserves that I see in the financial workup shows us having, I believe, and I may be wrong, but I look at it about $95 million, a $20 million operational reserve, a secondary 25 million. It's a little less than that right at the moment, and a $50 million cash reserve. Now that's about $95 million, which equates to me about a half a year's worth of funding if the department were to lose all revenue stream completely. I don't see that happening. If that were to happen, obviously we've had a catastrophic failure, and it might not be just affecting us. It might be affecting the water. It might be affecting everything, whether it be from an act of war down to an act of God, which would be like a big earthquake or something. I think we're carrying, personally, too much in our reserves. I would like to see, in my mind, a 3-month reserve based upon the budget that is submitted, and that will fluctuate upward as the budget goes upward. If the budget were to come down a little bit, then the reserves would come down a little bit. Leave it in that fluctuation of a 3-month period. I think the county would react very quickly if there was a catastrophic problem. And so I look at those things and look at how we work with it. The other thing is, I'm all for paying down debt. Don't get me wrong. I think paying down debt is very good. I'm a little bit confused. When we pay down debt, we're paying down the principal, I believe, which then lessens the amount of interest that is collected by the lending authority. So I kind of worked up what I thought would be, to my recollection or to my understanding, of 4 pillars. I'd be more than happy to send it out for people. I've shared it with Matt this morning, and it just is, they're follow the lines I just talked about, and I'll leave it at that. And open it up to however we want to comment.
So Eric, let me just ask one kind of technical question. So you're suggesting that the debt ratio floor be lowered to 1.25 than 1.3, which means that you're suggesting for the same revenue that the county pay back debt higher in order to get there. You want the debt paid back more quickly. Am I getting that math right? Is that what you're trying to suggest?
Yes and no. I hate to be fluctuating back and forth. I love the fact that we pay down debt and how we do it. What I'm looking at is when I go through the written work, I get one place that says 1.2, go a page more and it says 1.3. So
Right.
I'm somewhat conflicted, but I think, and this is where the trouble comes, I think I understand. 1.2 is based upon what the bonding agencies look at, whereas 1.3 is how the credit folks look at it. And so, that's kind of, to me, it's two different looks at the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, because it says Standard & Poor's noted in their 2023 ratings report that the department's 1.3 is below the median for AA rated entities. So you're right, 1.3 tends to come from the Standard & Poor's. I'm just reading that paragraph on page, I guess it's 2, at the top of page 2. Top of page 3, sorry. And then the other one is the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee adopted a 1.2 as a trigger for rate increases in 2017. So 1.2 is when the county would say, oh, hey, we're finally to the point that we need more revenue.
Right.
Is how I'm understanding that. And then the debt ratio, I'm also not totally a financial person, but I mean, that paragraph towards the bottom of page 2 says debt service coverage ratio is net revenue divided by debt service payment. And so if the county doesn't do anything with rates, and let's just say net revenue for all things is set at a number like 110, whatever, 110 units of whatever. As you increase the bottom number, which is debt service payments, that's how you get to a lower number. At least if, Ellen, am I doing my math right there? Right?
Net revenue divided by debt service payments. It's pretty straightforward math.
So therefore, if you are suggesting that we make the floor 1.25, what you're actually telling Ellen and Jackson is pay the debt back faster. Unless they do a rate increase, right?
Well, yeah, and again, I'm going to come back to, I think paying the debt off as fast as we can is a very laudable position to be in. At the same time, I think there are projects, the biggest one that I know of based upon my short span on this committee is going to be the Sahuarita plant, which will be pushing $200 million.
Right.
That's a large chunk of money. We're going to get help from the town of Sahuarita. So that means that at some point, the negotiation between wastewater, the county, Sahuarita are going to come up with how much each side's going to pay. And at that point, we'll know about how much we're going to have to borrow.
Correct.
And
yes.
And I'm all for that. I would like to, I'd like to see a 50-50 split, but maybe that might not come about. I understand it. But I look at those types of debts that are for large projects. 15 years is wonderful. I look at a 20-year period, and then as we are able to pay down some of that debt at a faster pace, we're just increasing the viability of the department and its financial position. And I'm all for that. So again, I go back to, I like to see a floor of 1.25 with trying to maintain 1.3 as the goal. And if, I think it hurts us personally to be at 1.37 or 1.4. I think it takes money out of circulation that we could be using to pay down some of that debt. I hope I'm making sense.
Yes. I think where I'm getting stuck is that in order to lower the ratio floor, you either have to ask for more revenue or you have to make bigger payments. So unless we're talking about the trigger to, I don't see the application, Eric. I think that's where I'm getting stuck.
Well, if the floor is at 1.2 right now, I've actually raised the floor 0.5%.
You have,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, if that's what you're talking about, if you're talking about changing that 1.2 number
Yes,
that the county set to 1.25 rather than taking the 1.3 and lowering it.
right.
Claire, jump in. Absolutely jump in. I cede the floor.
Yeah, Eric, I just don't see the point. I think the other situation leaves more flexibility. I think I think tightening of that bottom floor doesn't actually change that much. I think it also changes the precedent and may take it out of alignment with other guidance that the county has. And so I feel that I'm more comfortable having this guidance from Ellen about that. I don't want to create a situation because we're kind of looking at it and going, oh, this might be better. I don't want to create a situation that in fact is harder to manage this very complicated, extremely expensive utility. So my question to Ellen and to Jackson is, does this make it harder? Is there need for that flexibility? Are there things that are outside of the numbers that make your job and the job of efficiently managing the utility easier with a lower floor? That's what I think.
A lower floor on the top
With
number?
the 1.2, just leaving it as it is.
Oh, okay.
Just leaving it as it is. I don't know that I appreciate you spending the time to think about this, but I just don't know if it is a restriction that is helpful to the utility. And I would ask Ellen and Jackson to speak to that.
So the 1.2 is, as I indicated, a holdover from when there was voter authorized debt. The rating agencies are looking at the 1.3. The 1.2 we have in the documentation because that was what was recommended by a previous iteration of this group. If you're actually looking for my recommendation is that we eliminate the 1.2 and we go with what the rating agencies say, and we have a floor and a triggering event happening at 1.3. Because as Kristen pointed out, Standard & Poor's has already noted that our 1.3 ratio is below what is normally expected for AA rated debt.
I think that answers my question. So what you're saying is that the 1.2 is actually not something you look at. You need to look at, and raising it to 1.5 doesn't do anything either. So really what you care about is the 1.3.
That is correct. And I believe the 1.3 is a legacy from when, as I stated,
The 1.2.
the 1.2 is a legacy number. I would prefer and would recommend that get eliminated from our documentation and we stick with the 1.3. That is what the rating agencies has recommended and what they are looking at, and what they have commented on is below what is the median for AA rated debt, which is what we have. We have AA rated debt.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Back to you, Eric.
Okay. You know, what's interesting is that if you take a look at these reports, they're looking at 1.4 and 1.5 for rating of AA. We're in the 1.3s. So, you know, it's obvious, at least from my perspective, that just because we're at 1.3 doesn't disqualify us, because we have other factors that we build into it that make us look attractive to the rating agencies. But if you want to call 1.3 the floor, I can live with that part. But I don't want to. It just seems to be a conflict in my mind. This is where the trouble lies. It's my mind that if you've got a rating agency, I'd love to see 1.4, 1.5, and we're at 1.3, and we've been at 1.2. It seems like this scale has been sliding up over the years. And that it tend to make me think that it's not our county that's the problem, but it might be other government agencies that are the problem, who have had trouble maintaining even a 1.2, so they're pushing them up to 1.3 before they'll give them a better rating. And I you know, that's neither here nor there for us, because we are physically very strong in our management of our funds.
So you mentioned, Eric, one of the other things that the rating agencies must be looking at, and you're correct. They're looking at the whole portfolio, starting with the cash balances. The fact that we have, 20 million for an emergency reserve, 90 days worth of a reserve for operating expenses, which is in the $23 to $25 million, that we have $50 million in unreserved, accessible liquid cash. They look at all of those in conjunction with our 1.3 and say, good bet, good bet.
See, the oddity to that is we have all this cash set aside, reserves, and it doesn't mean a hill of beans when it comes to our debt rating.
No, I don't think that's accurate, Eric. And one of the things, as I tried to indicate, the rating agencies look at the amount of cash that we have available, restricted and unrestricted. We also have debt service reserves that are held by trustees to pay down the debt as well. So they look at our debt ratio. They look at our cash reserves. They look at our pay-as-you-go policy for the county and the fact that we are limiting our debt to a shorter lifespan than other utilities. They look at all of that in combination to say AA rating.
Good bet.
Here's before.
I fully agree with that, in that how they look at it in a global look. On for the debt ratio, the only really active portion of it is if we control our income versus our expenses. And that's very simplified, I understand, but that's the basic of how we have to control our rates. If we start dipping down in our debt ratio, we have to raise rates so we have more income to cover that debt.
Correct.
So if it's the feeling that we need to be, the floor needs to go up from 1.2 where it currently is to 1.3, and that helps and gives some security to the rating agencies and all, that we're at 1.3 for our floor, that's fine. But I'm wondering with that is, do we need to carry the amount of reserves we have? If we carried, you know, what would that do to us with the rating agency if we carried, instead of about $95,000 million down to say 45 or 50 million? You know, how do these, you know, there are 14 balls in the air. What happens when you move one down and one up? Where does that affect us and how does that help us? And again,
Eric,
maybe
I
I'm just putting
suspect,
too much into this.
yeah, I suspect that it's all related, but it's like any system. It's any complex system. We've got 4 things that these agencies are looking at. It's the 4 pillars, like Ellen's saying. They're looking at the cash reserves. They're looking at each of these things as a portfolio. And as she says, it's a good bet. So playing with one of them is going to make the portfolio become an increasingly not as great bet. So I don't know. That's how I'm looking at it. It's a system, right? It's a system-wide thing. They're looking at all 4 things to make sure that it's, you know, comfortable.
So
Right.
you're absolutely
I really
correct.
don't-
And if you only look at the debt ratio, and as Standard & Poor's has said, it's below what the medium is. If we were to raise the debt ratio to 1.5, then they would care less about the cash reserves. But I don't think that we have put together a combination of factors that gets us looked at from multiple rating agencies, because we go to 2, and they look at all of the factors and they say, given this and given that and given this other thing and given your overall management, you know, AA rating. If you want to have a more theoretical conversation about the interplayings between our various financial statistical pieces that the rating agencies look at, I would suggest that we have RBC come to give a more theoretical conversation about what rating agencies look at. Kurt Freund is our financial advisor at RBC. He has been working with the county for more than 30 years. He deals with government debt borrowings and can provide a level of expertise in the bond market and how these various things work. If you want to have a more in-depth theoretical discussion about what rating agencies look at, because it is all the interplay of the various pieces parts. It is not one specific thing that will cause you to get a AA or a AAA rating, but it could be one particular thing that causes you not to get that.
Yep.
Thank you.
I am personally not inclined to mess around with the 4 pillars very much. I think I'm increasingly convinced that, as Ellen points out, it's working, and it's working well to the county's advantage. And messing around with it, I think, could not do the Hippocratic oath of doing no harm. I do have a question. The reason my hand was up is I think this goes mostly to Jackson, but maybe Ellen as well. There was one point in our discussion where we were talking about that 1.2 and potentially eliminating it. And my question is this: as a utility, one trigger would be something catastrophic, infrastructure or a big replacement. That would be why you would have need for a bigger revenue, is to pay back. Infrastructure is the cost of use. And so if you have to put in more infrastructure, there's more cost of use. It seems like there's a little bit of a safety net there, that's the fallback on, okay, we've done a great job of protecting the users from a rate increase for a good long time, but at some point, utilities have to go to those users and say, ratepayer, our infrastructure is falling apart and cost of living is going up, and it is now time for you to pay a little bit more of your standard share monthly to keep these utilities running. So having that 1.2 sentence there, the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee adopted 1.2 as a trigger for the rate increase. That's what the committee can stand on to finally give the bad news to the Board of Supervisors, to tell their clients, which is the ratepayers, we have to support a rate increase. So Jackson, my question to you is that safety net a good thing from your perspective? Not completely eliminating that sentence.
And Jackson, let me ask while you take the floor here. Relate back to Claire's question and her interest in hearing from you as well as to whether there's impact on the operations of the department by altering the I guess mainly the debt ratio and the cash reserve pillars.
And do you want Claire to go before I chime in here?
No, I think because otherwise I might forget.
Well,
That's fine, Jackson. Go ahead.
yeah, so, let me just, the debt service ratio does not mean really, I don't ever talk about it in my utility staffing discussions. We are running a utility and we have certain, our own pillars that we adhere to, and we make decisions to run a highly professional, efficient, blah, 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 whatever adjective you want to put in there, but that's what we do. And it takes a certain amount of money to do that. And I'm almost frustrated, and that's a little harsh, but the successes that we've had have, and not just wastewater, I'll give kudos to finance for getting us good interest rates and all the things that have happened. We've been successful and we haven't had to raise rates for 8 years now. And it's like a drug, and people are kind of like expecting that, hey, we're going to run forever without having to raise rates. And, Kirsten, you said, when the infrastructure is starting to fail and, cost of living's gone up. Well, I hope we don't get to where the infrastructure is starting to fail, that pushes us to get rates. We need to make sure that everybody understands we've had a great ride. Things happen and decisions are being made, and we're going to need a heavier rate or a higher rate to keep things going as they have, or history will repeat itself. I can go back to the early 2000s and tell you horror stories because funding was not available. And I sense that in more discussions and policies, of administration and others that, hey, we don't want to have a rate increase this year. Well, guess what? We don't want a rate increase any year, but it's a reality of running a utility. Go ask Tucson Water, go ask TEP, go ask Southwest Gas. We've been fortunate with all the things that have been done to skate this long, but now our conversation needs to shift to get people prepared for the rate increase that definitely is coming. And we need to get the magnitude of that rate increase shared so people can start being prepared to swallow that pill when it's time. So.
And one of the things I would just like to echo what Jackson said, that came up in both of our ratings calls. And I personally told both rating agencies that based on the financial plan, we would be going to the board in this spring asking for rate increases because that's what the plan says that we're going to need to do. And they heard that and they said, check that box off. They're paying attention.
Yeah. It's deferred or not deferred, but not deferred is the better way to go. So yeah, so Jackson, does that sentence in there though of having that floor be a trigger? It may not be the only trigger, but it is a trigger that relates to the debt service ratio. Is it useful? in some scenario to at least have that sitting there.
Well,
It seems like that may have been hard fought at some point. Somebody decided we needed that. So that's why I'm hesitant to eliminate it.
yeah, I always was under the impression that the 1.2 was the contractual limit with all of our lenders that, hey, you can't go below a 1.2 or we're gonna insert ourselves in your business and your lives. And the 1.3 is rating agencies, and they are two different things, but it is confusing having those two. I think it's a great discussion, but from my own personal financial background, I'm just challenged with the fact that we have $100 million in the bank in all these different funds, or more than that, in funds and cash, in reserves and cash, restricted and unrestricted. And we've had those for, I think we're going on like almost 15 years now. And not once have we tapped any of the reserves. We've kept our cash at this level. And I'm like, it's a conversation that's, I argue with myself. It's like, well, how can we ask for rate increases when we have so much cash, so much money stashed away? And that's one where, again, it's taking these, what was the example, using the 14 balls or whatever and moving them some up and some down. Well, is there a better utopian alignment of all these things? Do we have too much cash? Should we raise our debt service ratio and only talk about a 1.3, lower our cash? But, now you're going to, of course, if I'm a rating agency, I want the maximum debt service ratio, the maximum cash, the maximum of all those things, and I'll give you a good rating. But when you start playing with, well, if we drop it down just this much, will that do anything? Or how about this much? They're all hypotheticals that I don't think anyone in here can answer, and rating agencies probably can't answer until you do it. They might hypothetically say, well, we wouldn't look too highly upon that change if you made it, but would they really change our rating? Because all in all, we have a great history of financial performance, of utility performance, and they'd be silly to look at us in anything but a good light. But of course, they have values that fit into their models and that they talk about, that when you start messing with them, they may punish you with a drop in a rating. And so I think it has been working. I think we have a little bit too much cash, but I'm not bent out of shape about the 1.2 and 1.3. I don't really let those bother me. That's the value we've settled on, and we talked out of both sides of our mouth for two different reasons. It makes sense to maybe standardize it at one value just for simplicity and confusion. But if you really want to dive into some things, it's like, why can we have over 100 million in the banks and never do anything with it for 15 years? That's the bigger question for me.
Okay.
Ellen, remember that question, but I want to go over to Claire, who's got additional comments.
Well, I think a lot of my comments have been answered, or my questions have been answered. It seems reasonable to go to the 1.3 number. I think that the amount of money in the bank question is another question. And I mean, obviously, I just think that would take more discussion. I don't know if that needs to happen right now. But I'm okay with the 1.3 if we think that is a simpler solution. I also feel that we need to make a recommendation for raising of rates. It's based on a lot of different factors and not just that trigger. So, the status of the system, whether we just think we're going to need it, what the expenses are, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Anyway, so I'm satisfied. I don't need to talk anymore.
Okay, thank you. And Kirsten, we covered yours as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we decided one way or another. I mean, there was some comments about taking out the 1.2 as a trigger. I'm not sure where we landed. I'm okay
don't-
either way. I just wanted to see what kind of the sentiments were. There was almost a nomination to take that out. I was trying to gauge whether or not there would be heartburn taking that out from the pillar, just to make it more cleanly 1.3. And a 1.3 with the revenue staying the same just means that your debt payments can be lower. You don't have to pay as much debt in order to maintain that. Everything else staying equal, which makes sense to me. So I don't know if you want to resolve that. I mean, if we do nothing, it stays.
Yeah, I think we're in the process of resolving it. Ellen, let me give you a chance to add to the discussion if there's anything that's come up since Jackson spoke that you'd like to address.
Well, I would like to come to a resolution on the debt ratio. So thank you for that. I think that just given these discussions and the discussions that we have had over the past many months, eliminating that 1.2 from our documentation would settle, at least in my mind, the conversation that we keep having. Should it be 1.2? Should it be 1.3? What's the difference? What's the, we go back and we rehash this, unfortunately,
over.
Yeah. And I would like to get direction, quite frankly, to eliminate it and put the 1.3 in there and just reference the 1.3. And Eric is correct. The bond markets evolve over time. Back at the turn of the century, 1.2 was considered the gold standard. It is no longer that. We have, 24 years of history in this century where we have seen more than one economic downturn, collapse, calamity, whatever adjective you would like to assign to that. And as a result of that, they have changed their metrics. We have also had unprecedented interest rates at the lowest levels in my lifetime, and probably more than that. And that was the norm for a very long period of time. I don't believe that's going to be the norm anymore. So again, financial markets flex depending on the overall environment around us. So if you're asking for my recommendation is to eliminate the 1.2 from the financial plan, only talk about the 1.3 debt ratio coverage.
Okay. And just as discussion on that point, it sounds like there are other things that we would base a rate increase on. That's not obviously the one and only. So there's other ways we can justify asking for a rate increase despite taking that out, is what I'm hearing, which settles fine with me. That's all I wanted to double check.
Claire.
Yeah, this all sounds fine with me. I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we remove the 1.2 and we go with the 1.3. I don't know how to say that in correct words. Let me see. That we just go with the 1.3 debt service ratio threshold.
Okay, there's a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All right, and I'll open the floor for additional discussion on the motion. Eric, are you wanting to weigh in on that point?
Oops, you're on mute.
You're muted, yeah.
I don't have an issue with moving it from 1.2 to 1.3. Obviously, the rating agencies looking at not us alone are looking at a variety of factors to generate where they see the need to be. I think the interest rates, Ellen, I fully agree with your comments when it comes to interest rates. We have all enjoyed a very, very happy market where interest rates were next to nothing, and now they're not. And we're going to have to adjust over time what we do to go forward with various projects that are coming to the forefront for the department. I also think that in our discussion with the rating agencies, we ought to ask them a little bit about the cash on hand. And maybe there's a way over a 5-year period that you cut that in half and use that money to pay down debt that's already been acquired. Those are my thoughts.
Okay. Before I call for a vote on this, I too have a few questions for Ellen about the 1.3. And the questions stem from the credit rating agency's reports. So if you have those handy, I'm going to be referring to them. Ellen, there's references in the Standard & Poor's report. They refer to the debt coverage ratio as an all-in coverage. What does the all-in mean? Are there different debt coverage ratios that they consider and evaluate? I just want to be sure we're talking apples and oranges when we look at our 1.3 compared to what the credit agencies are saying, excuse me, is our county medians or other standards. Does all-in coverage reflect what we use in establishing our debt ratio?
And I'm going to ask Michelle to take that. I believe the answer is yes, but
Yes, so we specifically reference the debt service ratio is the ratings debt service ratio because that's what they use. They do a lot of, analysis on the financial statements, like Ellen mentioned. Most of their calculations are proprietary. They will not share them with us where they get information, but they understand how we calculate it. The term that we use is the term they use. And so, we feel like there's transparency. When we're telling them this is how we calculate it, they understand that's how we're calculating it. They're not asking us to do anything else, but they do go through and they do a lot of other analysis.
So where they say we expect all-in coverage of at least 1.3x through fiscal 2029, which we consider to be sound. That all-in coverage of 1.3 is exactly the same computation that we're using of net income over debt service payments.
yes.
Okay. So if you're with me on that same page, which is page 5 of the Standard & Poor's report, there's a table that entitled Pima County Economic and Financial Data. And down towards the middle of the financial data part, the bottom is or are the debt service coverage ratios, again, described as.
Sorry, Matt, is this the page you're looking at, just so that everybody can follow along?
No, it looks a little different. Yeah, I'm in the water and sewer report from Standard & Poor's.
About
Okay.
page 28-ish.
In the whole package, I think that's right. It was towards the end.
PDF, but what page number of that
Page
particular
5
document?
of,
Okay,
of that
Are we
document.
in,
PDF
are we in the
32.
white paper?
That's where I'm seeing it, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody can see, track along. And you said
At
that
the
was,
top. Go ahead. Go ahead, sorry. At the top of that page, does it say financial risk, Matt?
Yes.
And then a red bar that says Pima County economic and financial data.
Yep.
Okay. Yep, that one.
That's it.
That was.
Yep.
okay.
So up at the top there, the third line in the first paragraph refers to the all-in coverage of at least 1.3. And then, so I'm looking then next down to the financial data part of the table, kind of in the middle where it says S&P Global Ratings adjusted all-in debt service coverage. And I don't know if that term adjusted now is making a difference, because the ratios that they're showing for 21, 22, and 23, 1.6 and 1.4 and 1.5, those are, I didn't go back and look at each one, but those are higher than I recall us having during those times. And it just made me wonder again whether we are talking apples and oranges when we discuss our debt service coverage versus an all-in debt service coverage versus an adjusted all-in debt service coverage. Do you, Eleanor, Michelle, see those end of year totals?
Matt, these are the same numbers that are on the rate workbook. So the
Okay.
final rate workbook, not the preliminary rate workbook, but each year after the audited financials come out, we finalize the rate workbook. The numbers on this schedule are the exact same numbers that are on the rate workbook, except for some rounding. Like the number in 2021 was like 1.61, and then I had a 1.42, and then I had a 1.50.
Okay, so even though we had budgeted, I think, 1.3 as our goal during those years, it came out at the end of the year significantly higher.
Yes, and that sometimes happens, due to the variance between what is forecasted for the revenue, particularly in the last couple of years, the biogas, and what the actuals are, and also the forecast for the employee expense versus how much was realized in vacancy savings. So we don't always end the year exactly where we're forecasting it, but we base the rate workbook during the year on what the forecast is from the department.
Okay.
So we've just recently, as in, I think, last week, received the audited financial statements for wastewater. So we will be updating the rate workbook with those final numbers and giving that. I don't know if we historically give that back to you guys or not. Michelle, I just don't have a
it's part of the financial plan, but we can provide it earlier if it's helpful.
Yeah, I think probably typically as just a matter of practice each year, if we do see that final workbook, it would be extremely helpful as we go into the next budget and planning cycle.
So what Michelle was saying is that we always update the rate workbook with the final audited numbers. We don't normally hand it back out to you guys and here closes out fiscal year 24. We do, however, use it when we start the analysis for fiscal year 25, but we can certainly do a closeout financial plan on fiscal year 24.
Okay, I need to make a note here because I think I'm coming up with an action item that Kirsten said we need to keep track of at the end, and that is to share the final audited rate workbook with the full committee each year.
And we're still in the middle of discussion.
We're still
on
discussing
Claire's motion.
motion, right?
Just as Robert's point
okay.
of order, this is discussion on her motion.
So I had one other question, Ellen and Michelle, related to the debt service ratio. And now I'm going to switch to the Fitch report. And I wish I'd made a note of where it is among the 89 pages, but I didn't. It's the report on the sewer revenue obligations. It's a 10-page report. And I'm looking at the third page of 10.
What's at the top of the page?
Top of the page, there's just a partial paragraph and another paragraph. The first heading is called operational risks. Or operating risks. So
Okay.
I think you found it. Yeah. So now I'm looking at the very last line there. Where it says Fitch calculated total debt service coverage for fiscal 23 was 1.1x. And so I'm befuddled, wondering whether total debt service is different from all-in or adjusted all-in debt service, or different from our ratio. When Fitch says it was 1.1 and Standard and Poor's says it was 1.5. Can you help me with that apparent disconnect?
Hey, while you're getting ready to answer that, I need to step out here. I have an important meeting going next door I was supposed to be in, and I'm gonna stick my head in there for a few minutes, if you don't mind, and if you're still going when I come back, great. If not, I'm apologize, but I can't miss this meeting next door.
That's okay. You can read about it in the minutes. They're very comprehensive.
Hey, Matt, this is Michelle. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. My guess is it doesn't include the defeasance. But I can follow up with the financial advisor. But like I said, a lot of the calculations they have are proprietary and they do not share with us what they are adding back in, what they are excluding. But I can certainly make the, make the inquiry.
Okay. All right, then that's another little action item that's coming out of today.
I don't know that I feel getting an answer on that though should stop us
Nope,
with the motion that we're
nope.
making.
Nope,
Okay.
I agree.
I think we have clarity on what we're attempting to
Yeah.
do here.
I kind of feel like we should get back to that motion.
We
And then
we
maybe
have been
color
on that
something.
track all along. So
Okay.
I was hoping for an answer, but there being none, we'll go back to it. So we're gonna act on this motion, and I'd like to just again be totally clear the language of the motion, because we're gonna have to present it to the full committee. What we decide really isn't terribly significant in the course of things, except as a recommendation to our full committee. And we'll be having a repeat of some of these discussions in that setting. So I don't know. I didn't take notes when you were articulating it, Claire. If
I think
anybody did, including Jeanette.
I think it's just generally, right, Claire, that if we look at page 3 of the white paper,
Yeah,
the second to the last line of the top paragraph is the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee adopted 1.2 times as a trigger for rate increases in November 16, 2017 meeting, that we are striking that line and any other related line. I'm not sure if there are related lines. I think we're striking that as criteria in this pillar. Just straight up, so that the only thing that remains is the 1.3. My only question is, do we need to explain why we're doing that?
I don't think we need to explain why we're doing that in the motion. I think we do need to explain why we're doing that, but I think the motion can be, I'm trying to get back to page 3. Hold on a second.
Put it on the screen if you want to see it there.
Oh, there we go. And if you could just take your highlighter or whatever, just just highlight that line for us in blue. Perfect. We're striking that.
Yeah, I think the motion is that I'm fine with adding that if you want to add that, but I think the motion is that we're striking the 1.2 as a trigger and solely going with 1.3 as the service. I'm looking for the words, the service. He said it in the original motion.
Debt service coverage
Yeah.
ratio.
As the debt service coverage ratio. So I think that's important, is to say that
Target.
we're holding to the 1.3 as the sole service debt service
Ratio.
Coverage ratio.
Yeah.
All right, now.
So whether or not we strike that, I don't know that has to be in them.
Yeah, and I think for historical purposes, it's good for the paper. But what's important is where we want the ultimate debt recommended or required debt service ratio to be.
And I think for the notes, the reasoning behind that is that the 1.2 was a holdover from previous days, and it complicates the decision making and has been an ongoing source of confusion and discussion.
And additionally, there are other sufficient triggers,
right,
that can be relied upon for rate increases.
Yeah, and all of that is part of our sort of thinking behind this.
Jeanette, are we completely confusing you? I suppose
No,
Jeanette's trying to take the notes.
Can someone read the motion back? I'd like to hear the motion read back.
Yeah.
So Claire, you moved to strike 1.2 as a trigger and solely go with 1.3 as the sole debt service coverage ratio. Kirsten, you added in to strike the line, the Regional Wastewater Advisory Committee adopted 1.2.
No,
as
I don't
a
want
trigger.
to. I don't want to add that. I don't
Okay,
want
so we're not including
It's much
that.
too complicated. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I personally would just go with
her motion.
Just the 1.3 debt service ratio as the sole trigger.
Okay.
Fine.
I think that's fine. And then because otherwise it gets into, well, it's 1.2 here. What page is it on? And if it's in the pillar, is it in the
Claire, you did add in your reasoning. Do you want that as part of your motion, or just Jeanette to make that part of her minutes?
Yes, I don't want that part of the motion.
All right, so we've got a one-line motion. Perfect.
Yes, one-line motion. And are you okay with seconding that, Kirsten?
I second it. That's fine.
And okay,
Eric's I want to write down.
I don't know. I think Eric has a comment.
Let me first ask Jeanette, tell me what the motion is so I can write it down.
Claire moved to strike 1.2 as the trigger and solely go with 1.3 as the sole debt service coverage ratio.
Is that the language you want, Claire, or do you want to modify that at all?
That's fine. That's simple enough.
And I seconded it again. So
Question. The line below the highlighted line stands out in my mind that the Standard and Poor is rating in November 2023 said the 1.3 was below their below where they like to see it. So we're going to 1.3, but are we going to get pushed again to go to higher?
only if we allow ourselves, which is not part
Yeah,
of the
I think-
motion.
Okay.
That's not part of the motion.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's
all-
a good reason to keep it simple because it's the
And-
motion doesn't include anything about the median.
No, and it doesn't include anything about the rating agencies.
No,
Nope.
That's fine with me.
it's just, it's, all of that is the explanation that we can give to the group.
Okay, so what we're gonna go to the full committee with, if this motion is approved, is a recommendation to strike 1.2 as the debt service ratio trigger and adopt a 1.3 debt service ratio as the sole debt service trigger.
Debt service coverage ratio. Jeanette's got it in a more succinct fashion, but you've got the gist of it, Matt.
Well, then what that succinct part is, I want to know right now.
Are
Before
you able
we-
to share a screen, Jeanette? Do you have it written down?
Jeanette,
somewhere?
would you like to write or say that again, please?
I don't think you want to see my scribbles.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
the motion is to strike 1.2 as the debt service ratio trigger. And I'm going to use Matt's phrasing, adopt 1.3 as the sole debt service coverage ratio.
That's it. Sounds correct to me. Claire, do you
That's-
agree?
Just fine.
Okay, debt service ratio, period, or trigger,
Debt
or
service
goal,
coverage
or
ratio.
target, anything.
It's a date,
It-
debt service coverage ratio.
Okay. All right, so motion to strike 1.2 as the debt service coverage trigger and adopt 1.3 as the sole debt service coverage ratio. We've had a second, and I'm assuming that that language still is good for Claire and Kirsten. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We have endorsement, Ellen. Or at
Matt, how
least
did you vote? Did you vote with us or did you abstain?
I
didn't know which.
abstained.
Okay, fine. Just wanted to know.
And there is now definition on pillar 2. All right, let me just look here. We've got 934. Pillar one, our 50 million, there's been quite a bit of discussion about that. Maybe we have time to deal with that issue a little bit and get to a point where perhaps we could make a recommendation there to the full committee.
Matt, I
yeah.
have a hard stop a few minutes before 10, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay.
So Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the board has approved the pay-as-you-go policy in very clear terms with substantial discussion about various factors that weigh into that. There was considerable discussion and deliberation that led up to all that. And I'm sure that you presented a very strong case to the board with the package that they ended up voting on for that. Now, I don't think the same has been done for either the debt service coverage ratio pillar or the cash reserve pillar, that those are more administrative policies that your department has advanced, and I assume the county administrator has endorsed. Is that clear that those requirements are not per se board established like the pay-as-you-go policy is?
There is a board policy on your $20 million reserve for emergencies. So let me see if I can't.
No, correct. That's and I think, isn't it also on the 90-day? Isn't that a board action?
I'm looking them both up. I believe that you are correct. Michelle, if you can tell me that before I get to there.
Sorry, the 20 million is the board action. The 3 months is not a board action. It was an internal policy, is my understanding.
Okay.
And give me the policy number.
I actually don't have it
Okay.
because it goes too far back. Because it was in 2010.
Okay.
And I don't have the board stuff. I don't know if it's in Michelle's old notes or Jackson might have it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess where I'm leading to, the 50 million cash reserve is not based on a board action. It too is a internal administrative policy level sort of recommendation.
You are correct there. What we just recently did with the general fund, the board adopted in the fall of 22, October of 22, a general fund balance reserve policy. We have, it would be my recommendation that we put together a board policy on these reserves and get the board to approve it so that there is direction coming from the body that manages all of us, which is the Board of Supervisors. And what I would recommend is that we put together the policy that takes a look at all of the cash reserves and delineates what they are. The 20 million for the emergency is that, that $20 million comes from that sinkhole on Speedway. Let's be very clear of where that came from. That was the cost of that sinkhole, and that was where that dollar amount was pegged at. It would seem to me that we might want to relook at that dollar amount to see if that is still an appropriate emergency reserve for that kind of infrastructure failure, if that is an appropriate dollar amount. The 90 days of cash reserves of operations is an internal number. I think that putting that into a board policy and having it float with the increasing costs at wastewater makes a lot of fiscal sense to have it documented as a board policy. What that does is it lends credence to any rating agency that is looking at what we're doing. It's an adopted board policy. It has a greater level of weight than just internal practice and process. And then the third piece is that additional $50 million worth of cash unrestricted reserves. If we could put that all together in one board policy that would then codify, if you will, those pillars and provide the, I don't know if the strength is the right word, but, you know, it would have been, you know, codified by the board, and therefore it lends more strength to those as opposed to them having just being administrative and or financial recommendations.
Yes, well, I
It's
would
something
certainly
worth
agree with
considering.
that. Yeah. And that seems like a very sensible approach and would take, I think, a lot of confusion and lack of clarity and angst. Yeah, everything else out of the RAC and the subcommittee's operations. And having understanding that and recognizing Eric's suggestion earlier of reducing the cash on hand and unrestricted cash on hand, and noting Jackson's concern over it, I'm going back to the Standard & Poor's report that we were looking at earlier, the same table, page 5 of that report. And I forget what page among the 89 it was, 84-ish perhaps. That same table that had the debt service ratios set out for the 3-year period.
Page
Yeah.
83.
Page 83, PDF.
Yeah, thank
83.
you.
Yep.
You got it. So I'm looking down, the next line down from the debt service ratio is unrestricted cash, and shows how much we closed the year with those 3 years. And then it shows county medians for that number or for that metric coming in at about 24 million. So I guess I'd be asking, would measuring up to the county median on that metric be acceptable to the rating agency, or would it cause imbalance in that the
Portfolio.
the whole look at the portfolio that
Hey,
they
Matt,
do.
can I just point out something to you real quick?
Yeah.
It's Michelle. So if you look at that average, look at the 23 million and compare it to the days of operating expenses. So we are a very large utility. That is not the same as the other utilities they're looking at. If you look at gross revenue, if you look at our 3 years, they're then in 160 million. The county median is 25. So 24 million on 25 million in revenue is not the same as 24 million on 160 million on revenue. So the same thing with the days on hand. Our operating days on cash are between 500 and 523. They're saying the median's 584, significantly higher than we have. So I think it's important that when we're looking at these metrics that we're understanding the difference the top one, the same thing, like sewer customers, the median is 19,000 customers. We have 295,000 customers. So I just want to, kind of looking at absolute numbers versus looking at ratios and kind of keeping perspective of what's being represented.
Yeah, great. No, I greatly appreciate that, and I understand the point totally. Thank you.
So I know Claire's getting to the end of her available time. So is our action item on this point, Matt, to our next discussion to be on this unrestricted cash on hand? And is there something from Ellen's group that would help us understand that better?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm headed is to get us to a point where we can either endorse the 50 million or come up with another number that's lower than that. And I don't. Go ahead, Claire.
I guess at this point, I would be just making that decision based on a recommendation. And I don't know what other information I would need to help me make a good decision on that. Good. Ellen, what do you think would help us?
I'm not sure what would help you. I think that Michelle pointing out that absolute numbers on a statistical page are not what we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at the ratios. And as she pointed out, you can see here that the cash on hand is relatively where we are against the medium. These are much smaller utilities, obviously, but the relationship, the ratio is what's important. What I would recommend is that I put together a draft proposal for a board policy that states our reserve criteria and our cash on hand criteria, and have that for you to look at. We can provide, because it's in the financial plan, some of these statistics going back a number of years. We can also reach out to our financial advisor, not to have him come, but to give us some additional window into what he sees from all of his dealings with rating agencies and utilities and public, so that that might help inform the approval of a new board policy specifically related to wastewater. So I think that that would be what I would recommend that me and my staff pull together for you.
I think that sounds great. And I think what it sounds like to me is just further development of the white paper with this additional information in it. Again, with the goal being to help the full committee better understand all of these issues and to help the full committee avoid having the depth of discussion that we've had over the past couple of months when we get to time in January to consider the new financial plan. So I'm very receptive to that. And the more the white paper can be expanded with different scenarios or any additional background discussion as to why certain recommendations are being made as requirements for the full committee to follow and the department. So yes, and I think one of your offers, Ellen, both this time and last meeting, was to have the RBC advisor come and make a presentation. I agree with you. I don't think we need that at the subcommittee level, but perhaps when we get to the point of laying out the financial plan to the full committee, I think that would be a great addition for that particular meeting.
So
And
I need some additional direction on that because what kind of a proposal or presentation are you looking for? We have spent, multiple hours talking about the pillars. And I would expect that you would not want to do that with the full committee. So is it a targeted presentation on our financial health and what the rating agencies look at? What exactly? Because you've heard me go on. Kurt's an expert. Kurt can go on. I mean, we do not necessarily, I don't believe you want to have a 3-hour symposium on how bond rating agencies look at utilities. I would think you wanted something more targeted, and I would need to know what that target is.
Yeah, I think.
I liked Ellen's offer to come up with the draft of what might be a board policy for us to consider, because I think that would have the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do in it. That was her initial offer that I heard that sounded useful.
I think that sounds really useful, and I agree. I do not want to have a full board discussion with.
This has already been 2 hours.
I mean, this is
just on debt
already 2
ratios.
hours, and honestly, it's like we got to move along here. So.
Yeah, I think just Ellen tackling what might be a straw man draft of board supervisor for us to get into, for us to understand. And then if we can understand it and make a recommendation back to the committee after we do the heavy lifting, I think that's more useful and will get us somewhere useful by January.
Right. And if there's some burning question that we don't understand, that we feel we need an expert to come in and explain, then we will have some idea of what that is. But at this point, we don't have that.
No, and I leave it to Ellen's judgment that if there's somebody that she recommends to come and explain some sub point of there that she predicts we're going to have trouble understanding, bring that person to our next financial subcommittee meeting. Just cut it off at the pass. Just bring them here. Get down to brass tacks.
And that sounds fine to me. I was looking forward to the full committee meeting, say in January, or maybe February, by the time we really discuss the financial plan. As much as I'd like to think that there won't be issues that arise at the full committee, I just, in my experience, we go down those rabbit holes regardless. There are folks that are new to the game that are going to be like Eric and ask a lot of questions to become satisfied with what they're voting on. And if we had a presentation of the white paper in whatever form it is at that time by someone like the RBC advisor, or in tandem somehow, not a 3-hour symposium for sure, but a targeted and a presentation that's based on the elements of the white paper that we're then going to say to the full committee, we recommend endorsement of these 4 pillars. And if they're going to go to the board eventually anyway, it'll be a timely discussion and consideration of those as that action's being processed. So for our next meeting, I agree. It's again just us considering what Ellen brings us and moving all of this forward.
So just to make sure that I understand what my tasks are, I will put together a plan on a proposal for a new board policy on reserves and cash balances for your review and consumption. And it will include in it any commentary that we might have garnered from our financial advisor as background material for that 1 page, no more than 1.5 page board policy. I will be making no further edits to the white paper until you've had a chance to look at the proposed board policy, at which point we will then include it in the white paper as a, and in order to support the pillars, we are recommending a new board policy that encompasses number 1 and 4, basically. The reserves. Basically, pillar number 1 will be supported by a new board policy.
Pillar number 1 will be supported by a new board policy, and the pillar number 2 will have the edit basically to it.
After.
Yep.
I don't believe I can edit that until after your larger group meets, or I can edit it now, and this is what we're going to propose. What is my direction?
I think you can edit out that one line that we had highlighted on the screen. That was the follow-on, wasn't it?
Yep.
I disagree with that. I think that's historical information that is valid in establishing our 130 as a standard, that we clearly can't go below 120, so we're going with 130.
The 1.2x,
Right,
you're saying don't take that line out?
correct. That is
Then-
valid historical information that's good background in the white paper.
All right, maybe that's further discussion. And then the further discussion would be, then we should add in what we just moved and voted.
Well,
Instead.
and I
don't
think it basically says that Ellen is recommending that we have the 1.3 as a requirement, and we're in agreement with that. But
So I will add a sentence that I won't delete the one that says 1.2, but I will say Standard and Poor's, blah, 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 in the November 2024 Finance
Yes.
Subcommittee meeting, a recommendation was approved to
Yes,
place the threshold at 1.3.
fine.
that's good. Yep.
That works. That's a 1-line item addition. I'll take it. That's good.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, nearing our closing, so I think we're looking at a December meeting, Jeanette, and just the normal process for that. Check the key players' calendars and send out the doodle poll.
Okay, for December, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I
And
am on
probably
the
probably
first,
earlier the better.
Ellen?
I am on vacation December 3rd through the 10th. So just
Alrighty.
So
Jackson, I'll get with you and Mona
mid-December.
later.
And Ellen, what is your date of retirement in January? Isn't it January?
January 25th.
Oh, no.
And yes, that's what it currently is. That's what it currently is.
Yay for you, but oh no for us, I think.
No, we have a great team supporting me and they are here supporting you. So
Awesome.
Excellent. Okay, so Kirsten asked that we kind of keep track of other action items coming out of this meeting. One, we had consensus and an offer from finance to update the rate workbook at the end of every year after the final audit and distribute that to the committee members. And then Michelle or somebody else in finance was going to check with RBC to see if they can answer that disparity between the Fitch 1.1 ratio and the Standard & Poor's 1.3 and above ratio. And then according to Ellen's offer, having a detailed conversation about a potential board action on cash reserves and debt service ratio. So they will be board based, just like the PAYGO requirement is. Anything else to add for the subcommittee's consideration?
The only thing that I would add to maybe what Ellen is doing is I've heard from Jackson several times the question of, and when can we spend that? So there, somewhere in our discussion, his ability to spend emergency funds needs to get clarity too.
We had the same discussion with Board of Supervisors on what constitutes an emergency and
Okay.
how things would be spent. We sent them a memo on that. Let me see if I can find that. Because
Yeah,
we
just-
outlined what an emergency
Perfect.
was. They had the same question.
Okay, perfect.
Because the reserve that the general fund has is 17% of expenditures, which is about $105 million. And they wanted to know when they could tap into that. And, the answer is, well, when you say you want to tap into that because you're the people in charge. But we did give them a memo on what would constitute an emergency from our administration's perspective, what would trigger the need to be able to do that. Let me see if I can't find that memo.
Yeah, maybe just roll that in with the information. That'd be perfect. Awesome.
Very good. Any
Thank you,
other
everybody.
closing comments? All right, thanks all for your participation. It's been a long meeting and yet I think very productive. So thank you much. We'll see you mid-December. Oh, actually,
Sounds
we'll
good.
see you at the end of the month at the main meeting.
Do we
Sorry.
have a motion?
To adjourn? All motion to adjourn.
And I'll bet Eric will second. All right, all in favor? Yes. Adios. And go
All right,
vote
thank
if you haven't.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.